Today's video is sponsored by War Thunder. Guys, War Thunder is one of the most elaborately designed vehicle-based combat games available. With more than 2,000 intricately designed tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships to command. It has something for every level of gamer, featuring fast-paced PvP battles at multiple levels of immersion, from arcade-style combats to all-out war. Each vehicle is lovingly designed with some of the most dynamic and detailed vehicle damage models in gaming. In fact, one of my favorite features in War Thunder is the component and crew-based damage system, as well as the X-ray camera that shows you exactly what kind of damage you've inflicted upon your opponents, rewarding players for skillfully dismantling their opponents and securing the upper hand on the battlefield. From the incredibly high-fidelity 4K graphics to the immersive audio that truly captures the atmosphere of battle, every moment is jam-packed with adrenaline-fueled tactical gameplay. And you can play War Thunder today for absolutely free on PC, Xbox Series X and S, the PlayStation 5, and any previous generation console. Use our link down below in the description if you're interested in trying out War Thunder, and if you are, you can claim your free large bonus pack, which includes multiple premium vehicles, boosters, and a ton more. Thank you, War Thunder, for sponsoring today's video. Vex Mythoclast has been one of the most iconic weapons throughout Destiny's history, ever since it dropped from Vault of Glass in Destiny 1 and broke the Crucible meta. It cemented itself in Destiny's history as one of the first exotics to be a special ammo weapon frame that actually uses primary ammo. Now, in Vex Mythoclast's case, it's a primary ammo fusion rifle that acts like an auto rifle. Eventually, it was brought to us in Destiny 2, and after a few buffs, it was surprisingly strong in both PvE and inside of PvP. It stayed like that for a while, but it's now gone through some changes, alongside the release of Season of the Witch. In Update 7.2.0.1, the patch notes read, for Vex, RPM reduce from 390 to 360 to match other high-impact auto rifles. But to counter this, Bungie increased the damage against minor combatants, that being red bars, and major combatants, orange bars, by 25%. Now, if you're confused by that last text, don't worry, we're gonna offer clarification here in just a moment. Now, these changes are kind of interesting. To clarify, since Bungie's wording is a bit confusing here, the only enemies you'll get that 25% damage increase is against base red bars and orange bars. That means enemies that have a big yellow health bar, like Carl or other mini bosses or bosses, will not be receiving more damage than last season. I know this is confusing because when you actually test damage on Carl, if you're looking to increase your damage, you slap on a major spec for your associated legendary weapon, and this increases the damage against Carl, which is even more confusing considering that, at least based on my color settings, Carl is a yellow bar. Even when you look at the icon there, that screams major. So what those final patch notes should say for PvE players is that they increase the damage against minor combatants, red bars, and elite combatants, orange bars. Hence why minor spec applies increased damage to both of those enemy types. Now, moving on. At first glance, it definitely feels like a bit of a nerf inside of PvP, and with my experience with it, guys, it is. Inside of PvP, damage doesn't change, but the RPMs have. And going from a 390 round per minute fusion/auto rifle, this meant that it previously had a 0.77 time to kill value, which is pretty competitive. And we start tagging on things like Radiant and whatnot, which for my Rain of Fire build Warlocks, that synergizes so nicely here for Vex Mythoclast. Now, post. Now that it's a 360 round per minute auto rifle, it's in line with other 360s, giving it a time to kill value of 0.83 seconds. Now, the whole reason for this is that Bungie made a massive change to ranges for all of our weapons, Vex Mythoclast included. Matter of fact, after doing our pre and post testing for range changes, which you can check out in this video right here, that literally reflected all of the changes in our ranges, pre-Season the Witch, and post, Vex Mythoclast would start to experience damage fall off at 29 meters. Now, it actually can reach up to 33 meters. So that's a pretty massive buff, and that is exactly why Bungie nerfed the rate of fire here. Obviously, in their playtesting or whatnot, they thought that Vex Mythoclast was going to be too strong, and they even brought up notations on that when discussing the nerf to Vex Mythoclast. Now, my thoughts on this, guys, is that yes, the range is very, very nice, but it's in an area where it's struggling. Hand cannons are so good now via their range, especially 120s, right? And considering they lean into that peak play style where you could dip in and out of cover, fighting against that with a weapon like Vex Mythoclast, which requires requires you to square up. The only way these weapons really shine is when they have a super fast time to kill value. Take SMGs for example. But that's also the other struggle. In SMG territory, Vex Mythoclast is getting outclassed. With the time to kill value now edging up to 0.83 seconds, it's losing out in the ability to compete time to kill wise in those closer range territories where submachine guns are dominating. And when you got things like aggressive SMGs that have 0.67 TTK values, lightweights are also around that same mark, hell even adaptives around 0.73, you start to see where this is a struggle mathematically. And unless the opposing player just outright misses their shots, 9 times out of 10, if you're both landing your shots, that SMG is going to win. Again, I understand why this change was preemptively made, because Bungie is concerned about Vex Mythoclast being too strong. And Vex Mythoclast has gone through multiple changes. You remember way back when, you just needed 2 kills in order to get the linear shots charged for Vex Mythoclast. Now you need 3. And I will say this, the linear version of Vex Mythoclast has crazy target acquisition in PvP. And once you start getting kills with it, and you start chaining that damage buff with Vex Mythoclast as catalyst, it can snowball quite fast. And as you know, Bungie does not like snowballing. Now, in one of the blog posts leading up to the launch of Season of the Witch, Bungie posted top 50 primary weapons for high skill players. And what this chart shows is both usage and kills over expected. This is what they don't like. You see Vex Mythoclast up there? No, the question is, what is considered expected? Usage is obviously not that high, but it's the expected portion that's concerning to Bungie. Hence, why they preemptively nerfed Vex Mythoclast. Personally, guys, I think that an exotic needs to feel exotic, and there's a lot of great things about Vex Mythoclast already, just by design. But being a 390 gave it that edge. Even though it shoots like an auto rifle, I never looked at it as a 360. Instead, I looked at it as its own unique weapon type. It's a fusion rifle that shoots like an auto rifle, but it's a 390, something of which we don't have in the game. Now, that's not to say I didn't have success with Vex Mythoclast. All I'm saying, guys, had it remained a 390, it would have been a very strong contender, but amongst many other strong contenders. Immortal is still at the top of the charts inside of Trials. Ammon was actually the #1 weapon inside of Trials of Osiris this past weekend. But with that being said, I understand why Bungie made Vex Mythoclast at 360. I get it. Selfishly though, I wish they would have just let it run hot. Right? Now moving on to PvE. Guys, a lot to say about this weapon, but again, before we get deep into the numbers, I do want to mention that right out the gate, you had folks running to Carl and saying, oh my god, look at the 25% damage buff to Carl. Fellas, that does not apply here. Again, those patch notes had the wrong nomenclature. 25% buff was handed out to minors, that being red bars, and elites, that being orange bars. Things like majors, mini bosses, that did not get the 25% damage buff for Vex Mythoclast. Now, some questions I want to answer. Did everything about Vex Mythoclast get the 25% buff? As in not only its base fire form, but also its linear fire form? Yes, it did. Actually, in our testing, pre versus post, we show a 25% buff here. And in our linear form, big shout out to Legend Monkey, because I actually did not have pre-data against elite enemies for the linear fusion rifle form pre-Season of the Witch, but luckily he did. And what we have right here, guys, is pre-Season of the Witch, the linear fusion rifle form was hitting 44,694 damage. Post, we are hitting 55,868, meaning that both the linear and auto rifle form of this fusion rifle, which I know is a head scratcher, all of those things are getting a buff against elites, aka orange bars, and minors, aka red bars. And I know I'm repeating myself, but I have to do so considering that the patch notes themselves were confusing. Now, this does not apply to majors. In all of our pre and post testing here, everything was the same. So for my folks lighting up Carl right now going, oh my god, look at this 25% damage buff, please stop. I know, I wish we can all take patch notes at face value and believe them to the fullest, but I've been bamboozled multiple times. Now, with that being said, with the rate of fire being dropped from 390 to 360, does this mean our DPS has gone up? It actually has. Pre-DPS values for Vex Mythoclast in its base firing mode, not including the damage buff that you get from the catalyst or any surge mods, was 26,860 damage. Again, this was it as a 390 without the 25% buff. As a 360, but with the 25% buff, that DPS value has gone up to 30,975 damage per second. So this is all around a net buff, and we're not even talking about the linear fusion rifle also getting that 25% 25% buff against minors and elites. Now, base comparison wise, things like Graviton Lance, which received a 65% damage buff last season, hits a 1 mag DPS of 46,319. In the kinetic slot, Quicksilver Storm hits a 1 mag DPS value of 31,886. Aztecross hits a 1 mag DPS of 45,671. Now, what's interesting there is I'm completely excluding the residual damage from things like the poison from Aztecross and the micro rockets from Quicksilver Storm. That's just those weapons at base. Those numbers go even higher than this. So the point I'm trying to make here is that Vex Mythoclast is doing better than what it was doing before, but it does lack in comparison to some of our most meta exotic primaries. Now, what's going to be picking this up is, of course, that 20% damage boost from Vex Mythoclast's Catalyst, and that picks it up to around 37,179 DPS. But again, this still doesn't match those other exotics. So what's the point of me bringing all this up? First, I have to acknowledge when a buff occurs, and yes, this is a buff all around the board, and this season, utilizing something like Vex Mythoclast inside of PvE is definitely something you can do, considering we have Unstoppable Fusion Rifle as a mod, which of course synergizes here for Vex. But I still feel like the damage could be more. And I know Bungie's mindset for this is that, hey, you have a linear fusion rifle form for Vex Mythoclast that you could charge up and disperse that does a hefty amount of damage. But keep in mind, you have to get kills in order to charge up those stacks, and it's only 1-to-1 against minors. Whereas something like Quicksilver Storm simply requires you to land those micro rockets to then give you grenades, which does a hefty amount of damage. Now, you're not going to really be using the linear fusion rifle form against trash ass, which is why it is unfortunate that the 25% damage buff didn't carry over to majors and bosses for that matter. Hell, a side-by-side comparison here for Vex's linear shot against Carl is 52,769 damage, whereas Quicksilver's grenade shot does 73,146 damage each. And what's the beautiful thing about Quicksilver Storm is that you can keep proccing those grenade shots on the same target. You don't have to turn around and get a bunch of ad kills. Simply just laying on the trigger, proccing those micro rockets and hitting an enemy will load those grenades. Now, this is not me saying Quicksilver Storm needs a nerf. In the current meta, we have some fantastic primary weapons. Hell, here recently we just went over Sunshot inside of PvE, and it is performing so well now after that hand cannon buff. In my opinion, guys, Vex Mythoclast should be better inside of PvE. Can you slap on a Rain of Fire Radiant build? Absolutely. You can do things to make Vex Mythoclast better. I'm not saying you can't make it work, but I feel like Vex is in a weird situation, almost like Revision 0, right? Where it's like, okay, you've got a weapon that does pretty decent single target damage and is also okay at clearing ads. Now, I will say this, I would take Vex Mythoclast all day long over Revision 0. Even in our damage testing, both of these two compared to each other, you see Vex Mythoclast actually beats out Revision, but not by much. The point I'm trying to circle around to, guys, is that yes, the 25% buff does make up for the nerf in Rate of Fire, but at the same time, I do believe Bungie is still playing this a little too conservative. Let me know in the comments below what you think. And again, I guess we should be thankful that this is still a net buff across the board, at least inside of PvE. We've seen in the past where blanket nerfs have killed weapons because of something being done to it in PvP, and Bungie not doing anything to pick it up inside of PvE. If you love Vex Mythoclast though, you'll be happy to know that that 25% buff does carry over into the linear fusion rifle form against both minors and elites. And if you're interested in trying out War Thunder, use our link down below in the description. You can claim your free large bonus pack, which includes multiple premium vehicles, boosters, and a ton more. Play War Thunder today for absolutely free. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.